So as many of you know, last summer protests erupted across Spain as locals complained about mass tourism, unchecked tourism, the cost of housing, the link between the two, and I covered that in a previous video last year. But now it's 2025, I'm recording this in winter, but summer is approaching, and I'm starting to see concerns and worries from travelers who are planning trips to Spain this year. For example, this comment in the Spain Revealed Facebook group: has anyone experienced anti-tourist behavior in Spain? Like what's been published in the newspapers? I'll be in Spain with my husband later this year, and I am nervous face. Which raises the question, what does 2025 hold in terms of these protests? What's the temperature of the country right now? What do we think is going to happen? Plus, there's something else that I feel like is the elephant in the room, and I'm not seeing talked about in the media really at all. And it's, are these protests really all about tourism, or is there actually as well a growing anti-foreigner sentiment in Spain? And so I think this video is going to be relevant if you're coming to Spain as a tourist this year, but also relevant if you're looking at moving to Spain and you're wondering, am I going to be welcome? So first up, what's the latest on the supposed anti-tourist situation? And I say that because so many of these protesters are not anti-tourist, they are anti-uncontrolled tourism. And so what's the kind of latest on that? Well, Spain's actually been pretty busy both at a national and a city level over the last 6-12 months in terms of trying to bring in measures that will hopefully improve the situation for locals. The government has passed a law which actually comes down from the EU, which means that all Airbnbs throughout the country are going to have a license that they list on the Airbnb listing. Airbnb has to ask for that number, which should hopefully deal with a lot of the illegal Airbnbs that are floating around. That comes into force in July. Then on a city level, such as in Madrid and Malaga, local governments have been putting in restrictions in terms of where Airbnbs and other vacation rentals properties can be located, effectively trying to move them out of the historic centers, which are becoming almost like tourist theme parks. And in Ibiza, Airbnb and Ibiza, the local council, have actually created an agreement, have been working together to remove illegal Airbnbs from the platform, without sort of long appeals processes and all this sort of stuff. So things are happening, work is being done in terms of Airbnb. But here's the thing, despite the measures that are being taken by the government, particularly around vacation rentals, the core issue remains. Housing remains expensive in Spain, too expensive for many people, and in fact, it's getting worse and worse. So recent reports show that the cost of buying a home has hit record highs, the highest price per square meter on average since records began, and the price of renting a home has also hit records. So if the issue hasn't gone away, then yeah, you can expect more protests, I would say, this year. And in fact, we're already seeing the so-called protest season start to heat up. In Spain, there was a protest in Tenerife in February, and in Ibiza, residents are already starting to take action in terms of blocking certain beaches so that tourists can't access them. And so if it's starting in February, then yeah, I would say that it's a pretty easy prediction that we're going to see more protests this summer. Plus, there's been a new development that I've been noticing over the last 6 months or so, and that's been a backlash from tourists or prospective tourists who normally come to Spain. So I'm starting to see and have been seeing comments online by people who seem to get very annoyed at these protests and say things like, well, hey, if Spain doesn't want us, then, we'll go to Crete this summer, or we'll go to Greece this summer and see how they like it when they're poor again. And look, I get it. If accommodation prices are going up because there is simply less supply, because some illegal Airbnbs are being closed down, then I understand that you might go and have a holiday somewhere else, and you might be frustrated about that. But I think it's always important that when you take it out on the internet and publicly air your frustration, you understand that behind this, people are protesting for a reason. They are suffering. If you're going to say, well, we're going to Crete this summer, maybe it's more about, hey, we're going to Crete this summer. I really hope those Spaniards in that country that I love and love to visit can sort it out and get their housing sorted so that people can live happily. And as well as those online comments from travelers, I'm also seeing media hype and sensationalism from particularly UK outlets that are kind of getting in on the Spain bashing. For example, there was some headlines, talking about Spain's tourism ban or tourist ban. This was actually, if you read the article, was in response to the fact that Malaga was limiting areas where Airbnb could operate or new Airbnbs could open. It was not a tourist ban at all, but of course that makes a great headline. And so all these comments by individual travelers online or the media hype and sensationalism is creating a sort of a climate of antagonism. But also, I think it's important to look past the online outrage and the media hype and ask people, well, hey, what's your experience like traveling in Spain at the moment? What was your experience like traveling in Spain last year? Because it's the experiences on the ground that are actually very different from what you might perceive your experience would be if you're just looking at Facebook. So what is the reality on the ground? Well, that person who made that comment where they were asking for feedback on whether it would be, safe to travel to Spain and was feeling nervous about their trip, well, a lot of people replied to that comment with their own on-the-ground experiences, which are very different from the kind of experiences you would perhaps think you were going to have if you looked at Facebook and the media. Here's some examples. Someone said, I was there in November and I saw an occasional anti-Airbnb sticker on a wall here and there, and maybe a wall with some anti-tourist graffiti, but no issues at all. Someone else said, never, no problems. Not once in many months of travel. However, they aren't haters. They are people whose lives have been significantly impacted by irresponsible tourism, much like my community in California, I believe that is. That being said, I avoid high season completely. I'm always as polite as I can possibly be in every situation. I do my best to be informed about their culture and habits rather than expecting to just act like they should conform to mine. I always say please and thank you in Spanish. I don't use Airbnbs in an area where it's contributing to their housing crisis, which sadly is most of Spain now. Another person finally said, I'm in Alicante in Valencia and no hatred or unkindness at all. The locals have been very supportive and welcoming, in fact, with me being in a wheelchair. So there you have it. I think it is really important, as I say, to look past the media, to look past the antagonism that is really built up and realize that, well, people have a right to peaceful protest. And in Spain, there's a long tradition of that. But I think it's important to note that the people who made those comments are also traveling in a very mindful way. They're trying to use Spanish, be respectful. They are being mindful of where they're staying, what kind of accommodation they're using, and they're having really good experiences. But having said that, that's not to say that Spaniards are not concerned. They are. A recent survey said that 66% of Spaniards want better tourism management. But the point is they want better tourism management. They don't want tourists to go home. People are sensible, they get it, right? Spaniards understand the importance of tourism to the economy and they do not want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But, this is a culture which has a long tradition of protest. When you want something changed, you get out in the street and protest. And that's what we're seeing. And I guess what I'm saying is that if you come to this country understanding that, then you shouldn't have any concerns about how your experience is going to be. You should expect to have a wonderful experience. But there's something else that's been on my mind. People who are looking at moving to Spain are wondering, are these protests against unbridled tourism also kind of protests against people, foreigners who want to move to Spain? And I think you could be forgiven for thinking that the Spanish government is anti-immigration and doesn't want more people moving here. Just if you look at the headlines, in the last few months, we've had, for example, the proposed 100% tax on foreign home buyers that was all over the press and misunderstood in many ways in the press. Yeah, it's a proposal. It may never become law. We don't know even what that 100% tax even means or is on. But remember, this tax that, again, has only been a proposal so far, would only be for people who are buying homes in Spain who don't live here. In other words, not immigrants. People who want to buy a home, a holiday home in Spain. But we also saw the canceling of the golden visa. So this was the visa whereby if you purchased a property worth 500,000 euros or more, effectively you would get residency in Spain. And that visa is in the process of being canceled right now. So totally understandable if you look at those and you start to think, Do they not want people to move here? But what's interesting is if you look a little deeper or look from a different angle, the Spanish government is very, very pro-immigration. It's actually the most pro-immigration country right now, or government right now, in Europe. So to give you a couple of quotes from what the Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez said, he said, Spain needs to choose between being an open and prosperous country or a closed-off poor country. He also said, throughout history, migration has been one of the great drivers of the development of nations, while hatred and xenophobia have been and continue to be the great destroyer of nations. He said, the key though is managing it well. And to give evidence of this attitude, Spain in the last few years has created the digital nomad visa, which a lot of people are using to move to Spain. It's also recently created or eased the path for undocumented immigrants to legalize their status here so that they can work and contribute to the economy. So while you might look at the golden visa headline or the 100% tax headline and think, okay, they're anti-immigrant, they're actually not. And so you might be wondering, well, yeah, why is Spain so pro-migrant? The fact is that this whole migration play, this whole kind of opening the doors to come and move to Spain is necessary for the economy of the country. We have, like many Western nations, an aging population. And a recent report said that Spain needs 25 million more working immigrants by 2053, ideally to work and pay into the pension system and pay Social Security. And what's interesting is this pro-immigration stance, which has at its core a real economic argument, is actually working. Spain last year in 2024 grew 5 times more than the EU average, 3.2%. The Economist recently ranked Spain as having the best economy amongst 35 wealthy nations. The BBC has been reported on this as well. And unemployment, although still high and endemically high in Spain, is the lowest it's been since 2007. And almost 90% of new jobs have been filled by workers of foreign or dual nationality status. But here's this little kind of curious twist of fate. If you see this El País headline, it talks about how the Spanish economy is doing really well, and the two key drivers there are tourism and immigration, which brings us back to the housing issue, right? Spain needs tourism, it needs immigration. These are the drivers of growth right now in the country, but it obviously also needs to accommodate, well, let's forget the tourists for a sec, it needs to accommodate the immigrants, the people who are moving here. Playing around the edges in terms of limiting Airbnb is one thing, but what the Spanish government needs to do is build homes and build them really fast. Whether they're going to be able to do that in time to quell the tensions and the issues around housing is an open question, and we're going to have to see if it happens. But that's what the government is doing when it comes to immigration. What we can't forget to look at is what do Spaniards think about immigration? What are their attitudes? So interestingly, there was a survey last year which asked Spaniards their opinion about immigration. And 30% said that immigration, or potentially the mismanagement of immigration, is one of their top 3 concerns. But what was really interesting is that the survey also asked Spaniards about their experience of interacting with immigrants in their day-to-day life. And a high percentage said that, yeah, they interact regularly with immigrants, whether it's living in their building, in their job. And in this case, across the board, Spaniards had very positive things to say and positive experiences in their day-to-day interactions with immigrants, which I think is interesting in terms of showing the difference between one question is, what is is immigration one of your concerns in a phone survey? And one is the reality on the street is that Spanish people are very welcoming and very friendly. And to get more information on what it's like to arrive here now and how you'll feel treated, I wanted to ask some recent arrivals. I've been here for 14 years, so it's a little hard for me sometimes to get a read on how people, might be treating recent arrivals because I'm pretty integrated into Spanish society. But I have a lot of people who have gone through my Move to Spain Masterclass, my course, alumni who are now living in Spain. And so in our private community, I reached out to them and said, hey, if you've moved to Spain in the last year or so, what's been your experience? So here's one quote. Most people have been very nice. We are trying hard to integrate. and it seems to be slowly producing positive results. I even go out with my neighbor for coffee every Thursday evening. It does help that I speak Spanish, but she also mentions my husband has been going to a language school where he is having some great experiences as well. And somebody else said, we've found making an attempt, any attempt to use language helps a lot. We live in Valencia and we're generally approached with curiosity, but using some Spanish makes a difference. Someone else said, one of my expat friends does not speak Spanish, but loves to go to shop at the Central Market and says that every vendor has been so helpful with his limited Spanish. And I'll give you a couple more because I really love this one. Someone said, only been here 2.5 months. The neighbors behind our house brought us a heavenly lemon bizcocho, a cake, about 3 weeks after we got here. And now we have a bag on the fence between us to exchange oranges and wine, etc. At our favorite menu del dia, the fixed price lunch menu, we're greeted like family. Miguel, one of the waiters, gives me the traditional Spanish kiss on the cheeks. Random strangers cross our table and greet us and smile and say buen provecho. Say bon appetit effectively in Spanish. And then a last one, just to show you that, look, it's not all kisses and sharing oranges. This is one is a bit more of a, well, I would say a very balanced kind of response. This person says, I've lived in Madrid for the last 8 months and 95% of people have been kind and friendly and the other 5% have been neutral. I speak okay Spanish and I'm always friendly and I think you get back what you put out. These comments, these really kind of heartwarming comments about people's experiences here are the Spain that I know. This is a country that is overwhelmingly friendly, and yeah, there is frustration around housing, there is frustration around how tourism is being managed, but the reality is complex and you have to look at the situation with nuance and also understand that the experience on the street, my experience, the experience of these people, the experience of the tourists that I mentioned has been overwhelmingly positive. But I think there's a key here. These people have all spoken about how they are trying to put out a positive energy, how they're being curious, how they are trying to speak Spanish, and effectively, like the last quote says, you get back what you put out. If you show respect, you will receive respect. And I think that's key. If you approach Spain, if you approach life like that, then you're going to have a pretty good ride. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments down below.